In the northern reaches of the world, where the white sea gnaws at the shores of forgotten islands, something ancient lies coiled upon the ground. A bitter wind moves across the tundra, carrying the scent of salt and the distant memory of a people who vanished into the mist. There, pressed into the earth by unknown hands, spirals of lichen-crusted stone trace a pattern that confounds the modern mind. They are the stone labyrinths of the Solovetsky archipelago, silent and stubborn against the erosion of centuries. From above, they resemble enormous, petrified serpents, their stone bodies winding inward toward a single ambiguous center. One might mistake them for a game, a primitive art piece, or a forgotten celestial map sketched on the skin of the island. But when you stand before one of these formations, the cold seeping through your boots, the feeling is utterly different. A strange stillness sits inside the spiral, as if the wind itself is careful not to disturb the path of the stones. Nobody knows who built them, or for what impossible purpose these Neolithic architects arranged thousands of weather-beaten rocks. Their builders belonged to a culture that left no written words, no carvings of explanation, only this perpetual, stony question mark. Yet as you trace the geometry of this labyrinth with your eyes, that comforting illusion begins to dissolve into the Arctic fog. The labyrinth does not care for our progress, nor does it offer a straight path to any obvious truth. Instead, it forces you to walk a route of constant reversal, a meditative loop that seems to mock the very concept of a destination. To enter the spiral is to step out of chronological time and into a mystery that has been waiting, fully intact, for 3,000 years. Most are constructed of rounded boulders, carefully placed to form a single continuous wall that winds in a unidirectional spiral. The diameters vary greatly, some small enough to be a solitary grave, others stretching over 20 meters wide, large enough to swallow a small congregation. These are not haphazard piles of debris. A clear design logic governs their layout, a mathematical precision born from deep non-verbal knowledge. Archaeologists have dated the oldest labyrinths to roughly 3,000 years before the present day, a time when the sea levels were significantly different. The first recorded mention of these structures came not from scientists, but from Russian Orthodox monks who established a monastery on the islands in the 15th century. The monks, men of deep faith, regarded the stone spirals with wary respect, often calling them Babylons, a biblical nod to the city of confusion. They did not demolish them, nor did they consecrate them, leaving the spirals in a strange limbo between pagan relic and natural curiosity. For centuries, local Pomer fishermen navigated these treacherous waters, and they had their own name for the formations: the Road of the Wise Man. Their whispered folklore held that the labyrinths were traps, not for fish, but for the malevolent water spirits that churned the sea into a deadly fury. The spiral path was a spirit gate, a confusing corridor where dark entities would become lost, chasing their own tails until the storm passed. It is a theory steeped in the desperate, magical thinking of those who risked their lives on the glassy, unpredictable surface of the Northern Ocean. But a more pragmatic hypothesis suggests the stones were deeply connected to the act of fishing itself in a less supernatural way. When the tide rose, the stone walls would create a complex system of baffles and pools, trapping fish inside the spiral as the water receded. Rather than a prayer to the sea, the labyrinth might have been the most elegant fishing net ever devised, a passive trap guided by lunar gravity. Other researchers, however, find the fish trap theory too prosaic for the sheer ritualistic weight these formations carry. There is a stark, symbolic intensity in forcing a human being to walk every inch of a constricted path only to end up exactly where they began. This has led many to view the labyrinths as a map of the underworld, a physical representation of the soul's journey after death. In this reading, the dark central stone represents the final gate, and the unwinding path outward is the chance for a spirit to be reborn. Where archaeology faltered, the echoes of ancient Arctic shamanism began to fill the silence, hinting at rituals of trance and transcendence. Imagine a figure in reindeer hide stepping deliberately between the walls. The clicks of a bone rattle, marking their descent into an altered state. And yet, the stones refuse to whisper the name of their god, leaving us with only the cold architecture of a vanished ecstasy. A darker and more isolating theory suggests the labyrinth served as a brutal existential compass for the Arctic night. When the sun vanished for months and the world became a homogeneous plain of white and black, disorientation meant death. Perhaps the spiral is a mnemonic for the sky, a ground-based star chart mapping the slow, circular track of the constellations around the pole. Standing inside it, a navigator could align the central stone with a distant horizon marker or a specific star to divine the homeward current. Yet this theory strains against the fact that many of the labyrinths are tucked into dense forests or face away from the open sea, blind to the stars. The very prevalence of the spiral shape across the globe, from Crete to Arizona, adds a layer of vertigo to the Solovetsky enigma. Was it a universal archetype birthed from human consciousness itself, a pattern hardwired into our species' visual cortex? Did these isolated Arctic tribes somehow share a visual vocabulary with Mediterranean sailors they never could have met? The silence of the stones allows for an unsettling synchronicity, hinting at a map of the mind that spans continents and millennia. They discovered that the final loop before the center narrows deliberately, forcing even a small adult to turn sideways to squeeze through. Such a bottleneck is not mere decoration. It is a kinetic command, a forced hesitation before the revelation of whatever lies at the core. But when you arrive at that center, what do you find? Nothing but a bare, circular patch of earth, empty of offerings and artifacts. It is a maddening anticlimax engineered by an ancient mind who understood that the greatest riddle resides in the search, not the solution. Some investigators have tried to unlock the code by sound, noting the peculiar way a low hum bounces off the dense granite walls. Imagining the rhythmic stamping of feet and a guttural chant rising from the belly of the earth, the labyrinth becomes a colossal instrument. This acoustic possibility transforms the silent puzzle into a roaring theater of sound, though no echo of the original note remains. The numerous failed attempts to decrypt the labyrinth's function have left the scientific community in a state of hypnotized bafflement. It is a zero information trap. Every logical hypothesis, fish, star, spirit, sound, is perfectly plausible yet fatally incomplete. The stones do not confirm a theory. They merely absorb the projection of our own civilizational anxieties about the limits of logic. There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle until you stumble across a design that predates the very language needed to describe it. Sitting on a damp boulder overlooking the spiral, a local guide once told a visitor, "You look for an answer, but they built a question." That is the psychological grip of the White Sea labyrinths. They reframe inquiry itself as a form of sacred cycling. The human animal evolved to seek an end to the chase, a door at the end of the hall. Yet here the hall itself is the only artifact. Over the decades, the obsession with the stones has become its own kind of labyrinth, trapping historians in circles of circular logic. Expeditions have come and gone, armed with ground-penetrating radar and magnetometers, searching for a hidden burial chamber under the spiral. Machines hum and screech, but the readout is always the same. Glacial till, solid bedrock, and the absolute, unbroken silence of the void. The deeper they dig, the more the labyrinth resists, mocking the intrusion of high technology with a stubbornly empty embrace. We have to consider the human toll, the quiet erosion of certainty that afflicts those who spend too long walking these spiral paths. There is a story that a young anthropologist, after cataloging the labyrinths for 3 years, simply gave away his books and joined a silent monastic order. He offered no explanation except to mutter that the stones had taught him that silence was the only adequate response to the infinite. Whether fact or folklore, the tale illustrates a genuine danger. These forms can breed a kind of vertigo of the soul. It chips away at the ego that demands the universe yield a clear, rational, and commodifiable secret to human curiosity. In the endless twilight of the Arctic summer, shadows sweep over the stones for hours without changing angle, bending your perception of duration. Time becomes a pool of still water inside the spiral, and the distant cry of a black-throated loon might as well be the echo of a Neolithic shaman. You begin to sense the weight of the human labor that dragged these rocks, some weighing over 100 kilos, from distant glacial deposits. Was it slavery, religion, or a communal ecstasy that motivated a tribe to build something with no roof, no food, and no armor? Whatever the force was, it was powerful enough to organize a society into an act of pure, non-utilitarian geometric creation. They were carving a symbol into the flesh of the world, a massive sigil intended to be visible not just to mortal eyes, but to the sky and the deep. We stare at their work now, our modern minds full of satellite imaging and digital code, and we are utterly mystified by a curve drawn in rocks. The labyrinth reminds us, with brutal elegance, that intelligence is not a ladder, but a landscape where ancient pathways can be lost forever. As the fog rolls back in, erasing the distinction between the gray sea and the gray sky, the labyrinth begins to fade from sight. It returns to the domain of silence and mist, a quiescent serpent that will outlast the concrete foundations of our own distant coastal cities. There is a profound melancholy in watching the sea reclaim the geometry, as if the earth is slowly erasing the chalkboard of an ancient lesson. One day, the rising climate and crashing waves will grind these granite boulders back into the sand from which they were gathered. Before that final dissolution, we are left only with the haunting sensation of standing on the edge of a momentous translation. We are the blind reading the braille, feeling the bumps and indentations of a narrative that we are certain contains a devastating truth. Yet the stone is cold and mute, and the only voice we hear is the one we project into the hollow center of the spiral. Perhaps the labyrinth is not a map for navigating the sea, but an instrument for measuring the depth of our own unfathomable ignorance. The journey inward is nothing more than a trick to make you sit, at last, with the terrifying infinity of the unanswerable. There is a comfort in believing time reveals all things, but the White Sea Labyrinth whispers a darker, more honest promise. It promises that some secrets were never meant to be broken, because their power lies not in the solution, but in the elegant despair of the search. As you turn your back on the spiral, the Arctic wind pushing you toward the modern vessel waiting offshore, you carry a piece of its silence with you. And in that silence, the labyrinth endures, spinning forever in the mind, a stone question mark on the edge of the world, utterly and eternally unsolved.